Narcissistic abuse is not widely understood, yet it is extremely prevalent. So many people suffering from it are suffering in silence. But MedCircle educator and clinical psychologist Dr. Ramani is on the forefront of research and treatment for narcissistic abuse. The pattern of psychological neglect and invalidation that its victims face is difficult to recognize and even more difficult to reconcile. But Dr. Ramani has the education you need to do both. In this series, she shares how to spot the signs of narcissistic abuse, how to help a friend or a loved one suffering from it, how to leave a relationship with a narcissist, and more. In our first session, she unpacks the baseline knowledge you need on narcissistic abuse. Dr. Ramani, it's our favorite topic, narcissism. For those who don't know you, why don't you give them a quick background on who you are?
I'm Dr. Ramani. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm a professor of psychology, and I'm an author. And I've actually written a book that's just about to come out, a second book on narcissism, why it's not good for us, how it's hurting our lives, our hearts, our souls, our world. So this next book really takes on the bigger ticket issues of like, this is everywhere. It's almost as though something seeped into the water supply. It's making everyone sick. And many people say, I don't have someone like this in my life. Oh, yes, you do, because you go to the grocery store, because you get on an airplane. This is happening around you. And even if it's not targeting you directly, simply looking on a social media feed and having to see all this, it's taking a toll on people. And then of course, obviously the people in these relationships, it is, I mean, as you could imagine in my relationship with MedCircle, we started the journey, my journey with MedCircle started in talking about this issue.
That's right.
I know these videos have gotten millions of hits. I get so many emails every day. This is a problem all over the world. People are suffering.
Yeah.
Like, this is a rallying cry for me. This isn't okay. So I've really devoted my career at this point to this.
What I think is happening is that people are finally understanding what it is they've been dealing with.
Yes.
Because when I first sat down with you, I was learning about narcissistic personality disorder and traits of narcissism, and then I was able to see in my life where that was showing up.
Right.
Where before I would have said, oh, this person just rubs me the wrong way, but now I have understanding behind it, and that understanding allows me to cope with it.
It does, but I have to tell you, there's a pattern of grief you see in people who say, what is this? I feel like I'm going crazy. Oh, that's what this is. Oh, it can't change. Your entire world, you can never, now your entire worldview had to change.
Yeah.
Because some people might have spent 10 weeks, 10 months, 10 years, 25 years trying to change this person.
All right.
The game changes.
Yeah.
I'm saying, And so people will say, thank you so much. I'm so glad I'm not pushing the boulder up the hill anymore. And then they see the pattern for what it is. You can't unsee the pattern. And it not only makes them, it fills them with, again, sometimes grief, regret, and then they have to turn their game around, right? They can, there's skills we can share with people on how they can manage this. But then what a lot of people have said, once I start seeing this, I can't not see it. And it makes people more discerning in terms of how they let people into their lives. I'm gonna, personally, I've been more than once called out as like, oh gosh, you're really hard on people. And I notice you distance from someone right away. And I'll notice everyone else giving that narcissistic person a chance. So in essence, enabling that person, giving them an audience.
That was big. Giving them a chance, in essence, enabling them. That's good, because if we were talking about enabling a drug addict, people would go, I get it, I get it, I won't do that. She used that word on purpose, enabling them, giving them a chance. Really good.
And so then if I'm the only one in the room who's like, not cool, I'm the vibe here, the energy here is wrong. And I think only people who have survived narcissistic abuse sometimes get it that strongly, like, I get it. And then sometimes the survivor of narcissistic abuse gets called out for being dismissive, for being mean. I mean, they really do. So it's almost like they're re-abused, re-traumatized. And what's been ironic, and I guess maybe I'm being a little pompous when I admit this, when I will pull back and say, yeah, no, this person's not cool. And then everyone's like, no, let's just listen to them and hear them out. And then they get burned by them. And mercifully, these people call me back. They're like, you were right about that one. I said, you could have saved yourself 6 months and a lot of money.
Absolutely. This series is all about narcissistic abuse. We've talked about narcissistic personality disorder, but this is really for the people who are in an abusive relationship. And this can go beyond just romantic relationships. This can be friends, family, bosses, etc. what is a narcissist?
Okay, so a narcissist, briefly, and again, we have lots of great MedCircle videos on this too, but a narcissist is a person who has a long-standing pattern of not having empathy, being very grandiose, being arrogant, being entitled. They tend to be very superficial. They're constantly seeking admiration and validation. They cannot tolerate frustration or disappointment, and under those conditions, they often explode in these big rages. They tend to be very dishonest. They can often be very controlling. Now, to get a holistic view of a narcissist, though, not all of them look like the big, pumped up, grandiose, like, here I am, I'm so great. There's also a flip side to narcissism, which is that very covert, vulnerable side. And these are people who they tend to be very resentful, sullen, angry, mopey. They feel the world's not fair. They feel the world's not just. I never got my chance. I was one of the great ones. That can actually sometimes be a very dangerous form of narcissism because they're sort of sullen and brooding and they feel like life was never right to them. They often walk around with very much a victim mentality. Those are the two faces of narcissism. And in the same narcissist, you can have both. It really depends on how their life is going. But in its macro, whether you're vulnerable or whether you're grandiose, both forms of narcissism are really about that lack of empathy, that entitlement, that arrogance. Somehow they're too good for you, they're too good for the world, they can't be bothered with other human beings, they just don't care.
What's the difference between someone who is narcissistic and someone who has a narcissistic personality disorder?
The big difference is more of a technical issue. So whenever we talk about a disorder, and we talk about a lot of disorders on MedCircle, one of the key issues is that the person is experiencing either some kind of impairment or distress due to their behaviors or their symptoms. A classical example would be somebody, for example, who's depressed. A person who's depressed is at irregular sleep and they feel sad and they can't concentrate and they feel worthless. They're uncomfortable. And on top of that, it's probably causing them problems at work, in their relationships, in their lives. That impairment, distress idea makes sense there. All of us have sad days. But the idea that the sadness and how long it lasts and it gets in the way of their lives, that's when we diagnose it as major depressive disorder. In narcissistic personality, here's where it gets tricky. A lot of people with these patterns have no impairment. They're getting promotions, they're getting the girl or the guy. Everyone's thinking they're so cool, I want them at my party. They're often very financially successful. So as far as they're concerned, they're killing it.
Right.
So where's the impairment? And distress are saying, I ain't got no problem, it's your problem. It's their problem, it's the world's problem. They defend themselves, they rationalize everything, they compartmentalize. The world almost exists for their convenience. So they're not distressed. And depending on what index you use, they're not impaired. Now, there's nowhere in our diagnostic manuals we diagnose someone because they make other people unhappy.
Right.
That's not built into the model.
Yeah, just because you're a jerk doesn't mean you get a diagnosis.
That's right. We do not diagnose jerks. And I think a lot of people wish we did, because I think the call on email I get most often from clients is, please give him a diagnosis. And I say, no, and why? I mean, he's a jerk. You've established it. I believe you. I'm buying it. Right. You know, somehow, and I'm thinking, there's no pill. I could see why you'd want to diagnose it. Listen, honey, if I had the narcissism pill, we'd be shooting MedCircle videos on my yacht.
Thank you.
In Saint-Tropez.
Thank you.
Okay,
yes.
So but the fact is there is no pill. And I think that people they're so hurt. They want this to go away. So narcissistic personality disorder, we only see it in maybe 1 to 5% of people. Narcissism, I'm willing to tip that number over 50% at this point.
50% of people?
I really do have to say. I think it's starting to feel like a coin flip. Maybe I'm wrong. I have to say, like in my inner circle, it's not
You
at
live
all.
in the capital.
I live in the capital, true, that's fair.
Los Angeles.
And 50%'s a bit much. You're catching me on a bad day. But
well,
I
because
have to say,
I've had a lot of friends watch your series on narcissism or your many videos. And a lot of them text me and they go, oh my gosh, I think I might be a narcissist. And I go, why do you say that?
Right.
And they start explaining why they think that. And I go, that you're not getting it then.
Yes, and you know what? Some people watch those videos and they say they're a narcissist, and they're kind of right. They'll say like, yeah, I don't want to listen to other people's problems. I can't be bothered. And I'll want to get to the core of what is this contempt about and frame it for them. Do you realize that the core of intimacy and the core of closeness is sometimes you listen to things, maybe you're not fully plugged in, but You care about them as a person. So listen, if some narcissists are unearthing their narcissism, great. It becomes a teaching point. It becomes a self-reflective point on whether they're hurting other people. I've worked with lots of narcissists in therapy. I can only get them so far. I can only get them so far.
What is narcissistic abuse and why do narcissists abuse?
Okay, so narcissistic abuse is not a well-articulated phenomenon. Those of us who do talk about it haven't even come up with a standardized definition. To me, it is a pattern of psychological neglect, invalidation, dehumanization that causes significant stress or psychological harm or distress to the individual who is the subject of such abuse. And this abuse, what it's characterized by, is chronic invalidation, lack of compassion, lack of respect, lack of what we call mutuality, back and forth, and a sort of a cold indifference to on the part of the narcissist to the other person. Like I said, it's not a truly well-articulated phenomenon, though a lot of us talk about it. That's sort of what it looks like. And people who are on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse, at the most severe, some of these clients, I think they look like they almost have post-traumatic stress disorder. At the less severe end, you see people who are full of self-doubt, anxiety, they don't feel good about themselves, they worry a lot, they feel hopeless, they feel helpless more than anything else. And all of those patterns make them less efficient and less able to get through their day-to-day lives. It hurts their relationships, it hurts them at school, it hurts them at work. So if anything, while the people who are narcissistic aren't experiencing the distress and impairment, the people who are experiencing their abuse are.
So why do they do this to people that they say they love and care about?
When you ask that question, Kyle, it gets at two complicated things. Number one, what is love?
We don't have time for that.
We do and we don't, because I think that's a key. Because a lot of people say, he says he loves me. How can he do this? He must not love me. And I'm like, slow down, sister. He said he loves you. You're going to have to buy that. Here's the problem. This thing he's selling is love. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. It's like you go to a bar, someone give you a glass of wine, you're like, what the hell is this? It
could just be grape juice.
It could just be grape juice, right? So, in some ways when narcissists are selling love, it's sort of like the grape juice of wine. It's something very superficial. It is something that lacks the depth that a healthy, intimate relationship has. It tends to be what we call very instrumental. And in that way, narcissists view human relationships as conveniences. So in other words, it's like this cup. Right now, I like this cup because it's going to give me what I want to drink, okay? Very convenient, and I'm actually quite focused on it now. In 10 minutes, I'm not going to give this cup a second thought because I don't need it. That's how narcissists treat people.
I get that. Really well said.
And so that's really why it is, that's sort of the core of why it happens. It's just this disregard, and they just don't get it. But they think they love because they may pay the rent. They might buy you gifts. They may take you out to dinner. I took you on vacation. I came to your sister's wedding. What more do you want from me? And so as far as they're concerned, that's love, which is why I've always said on around the 10th date, you need to pull your love contract out and say, sweetheart, this is what love is to me. And if you ain't buying, that's fine. But I really do think that people need to be clear about how many people are going to walk around saying, my definition of love is actually quite superficial, and this is the weight you need to stay at, and this is how I expect things to be, and I promise you this much in rent, this much in stuff, this much in gifts. That's kind of gross and transactional, but for narcissists, a lot of their relationships are often quite transactional.
Lots to unpack. Well, are you sipping wine or just sipping grape juice? In our next session, we're going to talk about the signs of narcissistic abuse in your partner.